Welcome to the StageLeft Podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to the StageLeftPodcast.com for all episodes featuring the likes of Gaylan Dorsey, Stuart Lee, Tony Visconti, Steve Cropper, Miles Copeland III, as well as members of Queen, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Smashing Pumpkins, Guns N' Roses, Radiohead, Kraftwerk, and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, who discuss in detail their recording, writing and performing processes. Today we deviate from our usual format by interviewing session musicians and Stage Left style members, as we're joined by singer-songwriter James Walsh of Starsailor, who, despite I having drunk many cocktails with over the last 7 years and have had deep conversations about his career in music, has yet to appear on Stage Left until today when we hit that record button. Today we'll be discussing both his Starsailor and solo output, both prolific in their own right, and exploring what makes a Starsailor song from a solo piece, recording a studio album at Rack Studios with a live audience present, being the last artist to work with Phil Spector, negotiations with Allen Klein, having Mick Jagger as a fan, and most importantly for this podcast, what James looks for most in a session musician or bandmate. So regular listeners will appreciate how unique a perspective the other side of the fence will be. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest on the StageLeft Podcast is none other than James Walsh. Thanks for joining us today, James. How's it going?
No problem. It's going well. Yeah, it looks like the sun's shining again.
Yeah, and we're actually doing this on election day, so it's July the 4th as we speak, and so it's quite a big day in the UK. But we're doing this in the morning, so we don't know what the result is for later on. So you've had both Starsailor and solo material out this year. So you had an album, and you've done a single solo as well. How do you choose when you sit down to write songs which belongs where? So how do you choose this is going to be a Starsailor song or solo song?
I kind of have periods where I'm writing for one thing or the other. Because I also write library music as well and production music. And occasionally try and write stuff to pitch for other artists and bands. And sometimes when I'm writing library music, I think that's too good for a library music song. But then I feel like I listened to Noel Gallagher talk about this, how everyone said like, oh, the master plan is far too good for a B-side, and Acquiesce and all these amazing songs. But as a songwriter, you do just think, well, that's what I sat down to write for. So that's kind of where it's going to end up. On very rare occasions, there will be songs or ideas that just... sometimes they're just not as fully formed. So I think that's an amazing little snippet, or it's an amazing riff, or it's an amazing sketching of an idea that I can take to the band, or even kind of needs the band to sort of put their stamp on it, to take it where it needs to go. So yeah, and I guess the more sentimental songs, the more sentimental lyrics I kind of keep for myself in a way, because I think as a band as well, we it's quite a democratic thing. So if there's any lyrics or any or anything that the rest of the band wouldn't approve of or think is too cheesy, then it kind of stays with me.
So democracy in a band is such an interesting thing, right? How do you best make that work, given you've been around, obviously you've been playing for over 20 years as a band, 25 years almost as a band. How do you make that work best? Given that, you know, I'd imagine for a lot of the songs you have the starting point, or, you know, you are the songwriter. How do you make sure that everybody has an equal voice? And if you're undecided, who has the final say?
Well, I say democracy. It's a kind of it's kind of like everyone has a leadership role and everyone has their area where they do have final say almost, where I take care of all the lyrics. So they'd need to, the rest of the band would need to object quite strongly for anything to get changed in that area. And Stell, the bass player, he's very into I'd say the sort of back end of things where we're in the studio, we're putting the final touches. He gets really he sort of digs down into the detail of, along with the producer, obviously, of like, oh, the snare needs to be EQ'd a bit more on that, and I think we need a guitar line in this last verse or whatever. So yeah, I think within that sort of democracy, there are areas where, and we kind of leave Barry alone to do his keyboard parts and his stuff as well. Ben looks after the rhythm and with a bit of advice from Stel, obviously. You can't have a bass player and a drummer that don't lock horns occasionally. But generally speaking, we kind of leave each other alone to fulfill our roles, and but obviously because it's such an important thing, kind of making an album. Everyone's obviously allowed to voice their opinions. Like I say, if anything is really niggling someone.
Because I always think there's so much great music that was never made or has never been heard because bands don't know how to kind of disagree well in some ways, and they end up like getting into fights and stuff like that. And obviously you've been around you folks for a long time, so you've managed to obviously navigate that. So if you listen, there'd be a lot of young bands listening to this, and we'd hate to think that records don't get made because of that. So what does disagreeing well look like? Like what works from your perspective?
I don't know. I think it's just spending the time to explore whatever anyone's suggesting, unless it's and I guess it's easier in a band because you can kind of put it to the vote, basically. If most of the band are saying no, I don't agree with that, it's not worth trying, then it really, most of the time it doesn't get done. But I guess if it gets to the point where someone feels that strongly about it that they're kind of throwing the toys out of the pram, so to speak, or really getting upset about that situation, they think, no, this song needs to go in this direction, or we need to at least try it, then you've got no choice really but to give it a go and then prove it one way or the other. I think that's the best way to kind of resolve those situations is, and like I say, it can be it does create a sort of timely process because you're indulging everyone's sort of ideas to a certain extent, but I think it definitely creates for a more harmonious room, really.
And I guess having a producer helps. And you worked with Richard McNamara, right?
Yeah.
On the last record. So I've never told you this, but growing up, he was like my guitar hero. Like I met him a few times, and I was like proper like starstruck meeting him. And it's quite funny that, isn't it? Like admitting that as like a 40-year-old now. But what qualities did he bring as a producer? So he was, for listeners' benefit, he's most known for being Embrace's guitarist and kind of co-songwriter with his brother Danny. And he hasn't really ventured a huge amount away from that. He's done a few projects, I know. But what did he bring as a producer to the Starsailor record?
He brought a lot. It was definitely a totally different experience working with him than any other producer that we've worked with, because he's, like you say, he's first and foremost a band member. So he brought that ethos and that kind of creativity to making the record with us. And him, and again, like I say, because Stel gets involved with the production and has a clear idea of what he wants the sonics to be. I think they're the kind of roles that the two of us really play within the band. Is I've got a clear idea of what the lyrics and the melodies should be. The basic chords, they always get augmented and stuff when once the keyboard player gets involved.
Nice.
But they start with the basic chords that I come up with, and then the sonics of the album. Like I say, still the bass player kind of gets involved with that, and that's where him and Rick would occasionally clash heads. But that's like you say about disagreeing. Well, that's a good place to be, where you feel you can speak your mind in front of a producer, and they don't feel too intimidating. So yeah, it was good to have someone in the room who wasn't afraid to speak his mind, and wasn't afraid if you spoke your mind as well, and you could be sort of friends at the end of it. But yeah, I think it was it's good to have that sort of creative person in the room as well, who like knows exactly what guitar pedal to reach for, or which guitar to reach for. We've worked with Rob Schnaff was a bit like that as well. He knew his way around loads of instruments, and obviously amps and things like that. But you can work with producers who rely on you to find the right. Obviously, they're in charge of the micing and the end product sort of sonics, but they sort of rely on you more to get your guitar sound right, and to know which effect is required for a certain song. Whereas Rick obviously knew all that like the back of his hand, and be like, right, this needs an echoplex through a Vox and all that kind of thing.
I mean, I always find it interesting. Someone once said to me, like, the role of producer has never actually been properly defined. And like, I wonder if, from your perspective, do you think the producer is working for you, or you working for the producer? And to follow up that question, like, whose record are you making? Obviously, it's the band's record, but who has kind of the most sway, if you like, in the decision making in regards to the vision of the record? Is it the producer, or is it the band, or have you found it to be different with different people you've worked with?
Definitely different to people we've worked with. I think when we made our first album, Love Is Here, it was more, the sonics of the album were more Steve Osborne's vision, really, mostly because we hadn't made a record before, so we weren't, all the sounds and all the ideas were in our heads. So he kind of, we let him take the reins, really, and we're really glad that we did, because it's something that we're really proud of. And I think I don't think that necessarily dilutes what you're doing live, or what the song should be, because he clearly understood the emotion and the feeling that needed to get across from watching us live and hearing the songs. And like I say, we were kind of naive to the studio process anyway, so it's like we've got no choice really but to let this bloke who seems to know what he's doing kind of do his thing.
Do you ever feel too close to songs that you can't hand them over to a producer? In that, maybe when you're composing them, you're not just hearing, say if you're playing on guitar and you're singing, which you obviously do so incredibly well. But while you're composing them, you're actually thinking, okay, these are the string parts, or these are the different parts I can hear, or this is how the song's going to go. Do you ever feel too close to the song to be able to hand it over to a producer for someone to have a completely different vision of it? Like, it was once described to me as like someone's handing over your baby to someone else. It's like, this is this thing you've created. How do you feel about handing your songs over to a producer to be potentially changed?
It's a good question. I suppose I've never been too precious about it, really. I think once you've made that call to bring a producer in, you have to, obviously it needs to be a dialogue. You can't just, like you say, if you've got a certain vision for a song, maybe you can't go in and go, right, it's going to go like this, because a really good producer might turn around and go, what am I doing here? Sort of thing. What you want is an engineer who's you can just sort of boss around. But then again, that's the sort of old-fashioned role of the engineer. Nowadays, engineers are just as creative and hands-on as producers. Just in case any engineers are listening and think that I'm sort of belittling their role. But you know what I mean. It's like I've gone off on a tangent there. But anyway, yeah, I feel like if the vision is that complete, then there are people who will just help you realize that, and it's just about finding the right person, the right engineer to help you do that. So, and also because the way things are going and home recording is getting better and better and so more accessible, you can kind of start an idea at home, and then, like you say, if you want orchestral parts on it, there are places you can get your music sent to, or you can arrange string sessions, and yeah.
You mentioned your first album earlier. I remember there was like a really big hype build up about you as a band before maybe even the recordings happened of that. There was like a big kind of energy around you. How did you stop that playing into the decisions you made in regards to the studio? Like, how do you block that outside noise? And it kind of links to today, like, you know, thinking about this idea of external validation versus internal validation. Like, how do you get the record that you want when there's maybe expectations from the outside? So if we look at the first album, did that noise kind of filter through to any of your decisions you made?
Looking back on it in a weird way, I think we were more sort of cocksure of what we were doing and more confident in our decision making then than I am now, to be honest. I look back on the record and like I say, I'm incredibly proud of it. But when I think back, we didn't sort of edit anything. We didn't think, oh, that's too emotional, or that's too, or even like that key's too high. I think it now, but but I think and that excitement, that buzz around the band kind of gave us that platform, and along with a sort of youthful bravado, you just think people are excited about what we're doing and what we're doing live. So there's no need to kind of tamper with that that formula or that sort of passion. And then, like I say, if there were any sort of little decisions like, oh, should the verse come back in after the chorus or anything like that, it's like, well, yeah, all right, doesn't make too much difference. And I think it's more kind of now that, like, when we made this recent record, I was more conscious of like, this, people are going to hear this, and we want it to have an impact, and almost like the audience was more in my head making this album than it was when I made Love Is Here, because you kind of going into the studio when we made Love Is Here after, like you say, all these exciting gigs and this huge buzz, and just feeling kind of on top of the world, and just ready to capitalize on that and to prove ourselves. And I think that ethos of sort of having to prove yourself, that was the same kind of feeling on this record to sort of prove something, but there was more kind of nervous energy and more sort of conscious that people are going to hear it, and I want to make sure that they like it.
It's really interesting because if you take your solo records, I wonder, because you're really prolific in regards to, like, you release stuff every year, or if not kind of 18 months. When you're sitting down, I hate this kind of phrase, but you get what I mean by this question, but not what does success look like, but what will leave you satisfied once that has been released and received outside? Like, what are you hoping to achieve when you sit down and you write and you record your solo material? Because for listeners' benefit, James's work, his solo material, is absolutely beautiful. Some of the most beautiful songs you'll ever hear have been recorded by James, particularly in the last few years. And, like, you've never dropped your standards in any ways. There's so many great songs you've written. And I wonder what you're looking to achieve when you sit down and do your solo stuff.
I definitely have more modest expectations when I do my solo stuff, and it does feel more like a sort of open creative outlet where anything goes almost. There's always obviously a quality control there where I think basically as long as the idea is good, without wanting to sound too simplistic about it, as long as I can stand by it and go, like, I'd listen to that kind of thing. That's it's not. There's maybe less concern over how big an audience it might reach or how it's going to translate to Starsailor fans. I just think, well, honesty is a big thing as well. It's like, I've not tried to be someone else, or I've not tried to fit to a formula. It's just an honest feeling about a certain thing that's happened, or even just how I felt that night, or what lyrics came to me that night. It's like, okay, there's nothing contrived about that, so I'll put it out, and it doesn't sound. I think my sort of home production skills have kind of developed in that over the years as well. Whereas I think the first things I released, I don't know what microphone I used, but it's just like a Focusrite and maybe like an SM58 or something, and I've definitely kind of improved where that's concerned. So yeah, I guess, and I think that really helps the Starsailor thing as well. Because when we do the band, there's so many more people involved and so much more pressure and expectation, because a radio plugger's coming in and a PR's coming in and there's a marketing budget. So you're already thinking, well, it needs to do the X amount, or it needs to do this well just to sort of break even. Which it feels sort of almost uncomfortable to talk about art in these kind of cold terms, but like I say, there's no kind of denying that puts an extra pressure on you and an extra kind of expectation, and also people are looking, people are saying, "Oh, well done on that top 20, top 30 chart position, well done on that. I saw you on this festival bill," or whatever. Whereas I think it might sound like a weird word to use, but I feel like cozy is the right word for my solo career, because it's like a smaller audience, a smaller group of people, and they don't necessarily have the same attachment to. Well, I guess obviously a lot of the fans are Starsailor fans, so they do have an attachment. Just to contradict what I was about to say, they they do have an attachment to Fall to the Floor and Good Souls and Silence is Easy, but it's almost like it's parked over here. Like this is what Starsailor do, and we're here because you've done that. But we also like what you do in your solo. I guess, like you were saying, we also like what you do in your solo career. And as long as you keep that quality up and you keep that honesty, then you don't have to necessarily emulate or repeat that success or that or even that style of songwriting or songs. Just keep plow this furrow here and plow that furrow there.
And while you say it's cozy, it sounds probably from an outside, it sounds actually quite liberating that you can write and put out stuff that you don't have those external constraints that you talked about like, is it going to, the level of success that comes with or expectations with Starsailor. But if you are self-producing, so I'm going to ask this question from my own perspective, but on behalf of loads of songwriters who'll be listening to this. I know you once saw me live, and one of the difficulties I've always had is if I'm self-producing is when the final edit of the final produced song is done, right? So I've held myself back so many times over the years because I will go, right, this is take like version 82.7, final, and then there'll be more afterwards, because every time I listen back to it as a self-producer, I want to make that slight tweak. I want to make that bit's a bit too loud, or that bit's a bit quiet, or I want to do a bit more here. How do you, if you're self-producing, go, that's it, no more, done?
I'm not sure. I still have that problem, to be honest, occasionally. When I look back on when I'm finally happy with a song, I look back and I'm looking for the version that I want to sort of send to the distributor or whatever. It's always like demo 6 version 23 sort of thing.
Really? Yeah.
Or a lot of times it is. I guess I've just recorded, and with Tiger on the Bridge as well, and an EP that I've just recorded at Rack. I booked 2 days. It ended up being 1 day at Rack. And I also got a cellist, Izzy Dunn, who plays with Gorillaz and Mark Ronson, and maybe she's another guest for the podcast.
Yeah, nice one, yeah.
I decided just to have something different for the next release. I'm going to have a cellist on all the songs. Sent the tracks to her and she put her arrangements on. But because my editing skills aren't amazing, that almost set in stone the arrangements of the songs. It's like, well, I've paid for her to do this and they sound amazing, and I can't start messing around going, oh, actually I need an extra verse there, or I need to change the key of this because it is what it is, kind of thing. And then went into Rack for a day to do the vocals and to do everything. So that kind of eliminated that opportunity really to do things over and over, because it's like the mic and the sound of the room in Rack and all the plugins and outboard gear that's available is a million times better than I've got in the house. So whatever I do here is going to be sonically right for the EP. So I've got to almost surrender that natural itch to revisit the song over and over and go, could this be different or could that be different? But one thing I've noticed is whatever you do when you're recording the songs, once you get out live, you always notice or discover different ways to elevate them or find a new chord or something and the songs sort of improve and evolve as the more you play them live. So unless you kind of toured, unless you toured an album or toured a set of songs before you even got in the studio, there's always going to be um, ways that songs can evolve. So it's just at some point you've got to, again, like, just, it sounds simplistic, but at some point you've got to let go, or no one's going to hear what you've done.
And I remember speaking to, and you'll know him, Ian Brodie from the Lightning Seeds about this, because he's obviously known as being a brilliant producer. He's just produced Paul Heaton's new record. He produced records for the Zootons and loads of other bands, Echo and the Bunnymen even. And he basically said he's so used to producing people, and so he self-produces, but then he didn't release a record under the name Lightning Seeds for like 20 years pretty much because of this exact issue. And so I think maybe there's a thing about like getting someone else to make that decision perhaps, and just like offloading that to get a producer basically to make that decision. Here's a question for you though. Once you press send and that's gone forever and you can't change it, if you listen back to the body of work you've done, what percentage of those songs do you listen back and go, oh, I'd love to make a tweak?
20%.
Okay.
Yeah, not a huge amount, because I feel like, yeah, the songs are, when they get out there, it's like that's where they need to be. And yeah, I guess maybe some of the older songs, but then you can't wait 5 years to, I guess people do, but you can't, when you sat there writing a song, you don't think, oh, in 5 years I'll know where this song needs to go. You think, oh, this is the best it can be at this point. So
you mentioned recording Tiger at Bridget Rack, and it was wonderful to experience that and see that. So basically, you kind of invited fans down and people you knew to kind of see you record the whole album in kind of pretty much one take. Oh, I think you did it a few times, but you recorded what might be, say, 45 minutes of music, song after song after song, and we had to stay completely silent. And I remember one person clapped accidentally at the end of a song, which obviously like fucked things up for the edit afterwards. And I remember Joe Dudridge like shooting a look at him, just like, that was an incredible experience. I'd never seen anything like that or even heard of that happening before. When you were doing that, how did it help you, or was it a disadvantage or more of a challenge having people in the room? Like, how did it play into your performance? Because that was what was going down and being cut on record and there forever.
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed the experience. I feel like, because I'd made records this sort of traditional way for so many years, it felt like a good way to do it, and obviously sort of budgetary constraints as well. It's like, if you're in rack for 2 weeks, it's a lot more expensive than kind of doing it in a couple of days. And I think it's interesting as well, because you are performing. You're obviously putting on a performance in the studio anyway, because you've got the audience in the back of your mind, and you're thinking, oh, right, people are going to hear this, so I want to give it my best. But having the audience there gave it that extra element of putting on a performance, and I'm trying to think the best way to put it.
Because you were still in the individual booth, so it wasn't like, just for listeners' benefit, it wasn't like you set up on stage and like played a gig. You were in your individual booths in different rooms, in fact, and we would kind of just sat in the middle, and it brought really interesting tension, because like you didn't want to breathe, because you were like you couldn't cough. There was no way, like coughing just wasn't allowed, right? Because you were like right next to like an amp that was mic'd up or whatever, or you're really right in the middle of everything. It was absolutely incredible. And I just wondered how it was from your perspective, if you think that helped the experience, or if it made it more challenging.
I think it created that energy. I think was great. A great experience. Obviously challenging because you can't sort of perfect it or go over it with a fine tooth comb that you might with a more traditionally recorded thing. But back in the day, it's like the Beatles would record albums in a day.
True.
And it was just about sort of capturing that kind of spirit and that kind of feeling where it's just capturing a moment, I guess. I think ultimately that's what you want to achieve when you record anything live, is to be in the right place at the right time. And we were lucky because, like you say, it was a really nice set of people who came along to the recording as well, who completely understood what we were trying to achieve and added to that energy.
We're recording this a few days after Glastonbury took place, and there was a really interesting thing that happened during Michael Kiwanuka's set that some people might have seen or might not have seen. And I'm bringing this up because it's actually once happened to me. I was doing a song that I'd played 250, 300 times at least, and never had a problem pitching and singing in tune to it. And Michael Kiwanuka started a song the other day, and he had to abandon the song because he couldn't find the key. That he was, and just for some bizarre reason on stage at Glastonbury, he said, "This is the worst nightmare ever." And for a listener's benefit, this is a guy who's got an amazing voice, who is an incredible musician, did everything else perfectly in tune. And they kind of said, "Oh, there's an error with the keyboard," but I don't think there was. He was literally starting the song, and he just couldn't. It was almost like he was singing at the harmony instead of the actual. He couldn't find the pitch. Have you ever had anything like that in all your career? And can you explain it? Because I've heard it happen to a few people.
Yeah, I think the worst thing for me was years ago. I really lost my voice. I think it was probably the first time I lost my voice, or my voice got very sort of tired and croaky. During a gig, we were supporting the Charlatans.
Nice.
And at Wembley, I think it was. And it was just horrifying. Because I just froze and was like, right, I need a honey and lemon, or can someone help me, kind of thing. Almost like you've injured yourself.
Wow.
But that was quite an interesting experience because I think ever since then, because what I found was like people remember my reaction to my voice kind of going more than my voice kind of going. So from that point onwards, almost, it's like, unless it's completely 100% nothing coming out of my throat, I just sort of plow through it because obviously as a musician and a kind of perfectionist, you feel like things are a lot worse to the audience than they actually are, because people, it's sort of, yeah, because to me, people that saw that moment say, are like, what, that's the gig that you kind of walked off stage, what happened there, kind of thing. And at the time I was like, do you not realize that my voice was fucked and I had to go and sort it out somehow? But yeah, like I say, now I feel like there are a lot of things that you think, luckily nothing's happened to me where I've not been able to find the pitch or anything like that. But there are a lot of things where you think this is going terribly and I sound awful, and it's not as bad to the audience as you think it is. So I think that's probably good advice, I guess, to young musicians, is just try and get to the end of the song. If you can get to the end of the song, get to the end of the song, because whenever a song stops before or halfway through, it's always a sort of awkward moment. But I think, like you say about the Michael Kiwanuka thing, people are more forgiving than they're kind of given credit for. And he's done more than enough as an artist for his audience, like producing all that amazing music, and he's proven himself time and time again as a musician. And sometimes those moments where things go slightly awry kind of prove that you're human.
Yeah.
So just like I say, if you can get through the song, get through the song. But if there is a moment where it just all collapses, when it's organic and when it's kind of down to nerves, or it's down to energy, or it's down to, most of the time it's down to a technical issue. Sometimes those moments can kind of make a performance, and people think, well, it proves you're human as well. It proves you. I remember one of the funniest things that happened to us was we gave our sound engineer, back in the day where they had to play CDs as like walk-on music, we gave our sound engineer a copy of the Alcoholic single to play the B-side, because it was a remix of Fall to the Floor or something. So like, can you play this as our walk-on music? And he ended up playing Alcoholic. Or like, I think maybe 20 seconds of it kind of burst out before someone managed to turn it off. And his excuse was it was a CD player that you couldn't skip tracks on. You're like, what is this? What are you talking about? So that was quite funny.
What great walk-on music that is.
Yeah.
So when I said that you were coming onto the podcast to a few trusted regular listeners, a few people sent a few questions, right? So we've got one here from a Mr. J. Dale of Goldheart Mansions in New York. Allen Klein. So for listeners' benefit, Allen Klein was manager of the Beatles, Stones, Sam Cooke, and dealt with the legal affairs of Phil Spector. And he was kind of notorious for his aggressive contract negotiations. There was accusations from the Stones that he withheld royalty payments, that he stole publishing rights to their songs. He neglected to pay their tax for 5 years, and that led to their kind of French exile in 1971. What was it like to work or interact with him? And as a young person, like, how do you walk into meetings or communications with someone of that kind of profile? How did you go about that, and what would you advise young musicians going into meeting people like that in future?
The only time we met him in person was after we stopped working with Phil Spector.
Ouch.
And he wanted to have this sort of summit meeting. Well, I think he just basically wanted to humiliate us for kind of treating his client like that, without any sort of thought for how the whole process might be affecting our mental health, or our kind of our sort of side of things. And I remember he just kept saying, "How dare you do this to such a legend?" And look what you've done to him, almost kind of thing. It's just like, he's quite an intimidating character, to be honest. Yeah, it was. It's not a period that I look on particularly fondly from any kind of aspect, really. I think, well, the first sort of the first week or so, that the trial week almost that we did with Phil Spector was amazing. To kind of, if you sort of take it in a time machine sort of perspective, where everything is obviously clouded by what happened subsequently, and the murder of Lana Clarkson. It's obviously a terrible tragedy. But to go back in a time machine to that period before we knew any of this was going to happen, that first week was what's going on. We're working with Phil Spector, and he's opening up the echo chambers at we were at Metropolis Studios, and that classic sound is coming out of the speakers, and the two songs that we recorded in that period were the best things we did and ended up on the record. And but by the time Allen Klein got involved and came over, and that was when things had kind of soured quite irreparably or whatever. So it was it maybe wasn't it probably wasn't the right scenario or the right environment to get a well-rounded view of Allen Klein, because he was very much in attack mode, if that makes sense.
And how did you defend yourself in that situation, being so young and making a brave decision, which you did, which was to stop working with Phil for good reasons, as you say? You talked about your own mental health and stuff like that. How did you stand your ground in that situation, or how did it play out?
Well, Jeff Barrett was there from Heavenly, who was our A&R at the time. And again, him and Stell, the bass player in the band, they sort of took the lead. As you can probably tell, I'm not I'm probably not the most vocal in those sort of very. I do sort of speak my mind on things when it comes to a point. But in that sort of situation, it all felt quite almost aggressive and just. And I'd probably be able to handle that situation a lot better now. But at the time I was trying to think, like 22, 23. Just had a kid as well. My eldest daughter had just been born. So it just felt like this is too much for me to kind of to really take the lead on.
Yeah, it's a difficult position you found yourself in. From a purely musical perspective, you said that when you did those two songs for Phil Spector, they were like the two best you ever did. Do you think, looking back, was anything specific that he did that enabled them to just happen to be the best two tracks he recorded?
I don't know the best songs we ever did, but
sorry,
definitely the ones we did
just that it was the best. That they. Sorry, maybe I misheard you there. I thought you said that they were the two that they came out the best.
The best songs we did with him, for sure.
With him, right? Got it. Right, okay, got it.
Yeah, I don't know. Silence is Easy is probably up there.
It's banger, mate.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you saying?
Yes,
what was it? What did he bring, or what?
Yeah. What did he do to get such a great performance out of you? I guess, was there anything specific that you haven't seen from other producers?
I think his approach was quite methodical and quite. What was very sort of unique was what he did with the drums. I think he kept. It was probably a bit of a source of conflict in the end, because he has quite a straightforward approach to. Ended up having quite a straightforward approach and clear approach to the rhythms on every track. But obviously, him and Ben, the drummer, were in harmony on that one. I'm like, yeah, this is what Silence is Easy needs to do, and this is what the drums need to do. And I think it was only as the sessions went on and he took a similar approach to all the tracks that the drummer would start to get disillusioned, and Barry as well to a certain degree, would start to get disillusioned that they're almost having to do the same thing or very similar thing on most of the songs, which is the classic sort of Spector beat, which obviously, again, you sort of have to caveat everything with the sort of character that he became, with this sort of dark cloud over him. But like looking back on that and thinking about the character that he was, there's still that intrigue as to what kind of record might have come out if we had just surrendered to all his ideas and made a start to finish Phil Spector record. But ultimately that wouldn't have been in name it would have been a Starsailor record, and I guess the songs would have still been ours. But it would have been a Phil Spector record more than anything else, because he had like you were saying about producers with a vision, he had a very clear vision of what he wanted, and he's a very musical producer as well. Like the engineer took care of most of the technical side of things, whereas most of the producers that we've worked with previously had an idea of what mics they wanted to use, where everything needed to be set up. He kind of left a lot of that to the engineer, and his thing was what all the musicians needed to do, and almost like a musical arranger as much as a producer, what all the musicians needed to do, and what the string. I remember him working with the string players, and he gave them the hardest time out of anyone, because they're sort of sat there with. I think he's used to working with orchestras or string sections that can just play completely to ear, because they kind of sat there with these scores that he'd written out, but he'd have new ideas as they were recording, and just sort of sing them down the microphone, or go up there, or go down there. I think a few of them kind of struggle with that, because they're like, we're just here to kind of read the dots on the page, and we've never had to kind of play by ear like that and react to this guy sort of shouting down a microphone at us. So yeah, the whole experience was a strange one, really.
There's kind of stories, and I guess some of these might be myths, that he's in the past, members of the Ramones, he held a gun to kind of motivate them in the studio and that kind of thing. Did he ever do anything like that with yourselves?
No, it's we just remember the wigs. He wore a different wig every time he came to the studio, which was quite and the suits with his own initials on were a strange touch as well. I'm not sure how it would go down if I started turning up to gigs with JW on it.
And did he give you any specific feedback? Like, was he, because I think you'd written the song and demoed the song, and he'd heard it, and he loved Silence is Easy particularly. So how different, like, did he give you feedback and say, actually, you sing this differently in the same way as he was saying, like, go there to the string players? Or were you left to your own devices, you personally?
I can't remember, to be honest. I wish I could sort of recount, take myself back to sort of being in the vocal booth with him in my ears. I don't remember anything particularly. I don't remember any particular tension where he'd like shout at me to kind of try and perfect something. So I guess that would imply that it was all I was fairly sort of left to my own devices. So yeah, I think it was more some of the songs that he wasn't necessarily on board with or wanted to change. They were I feel like there was more sort of tension, or there was more kind of I remember Born Again. He really loved the song Born Again as well. But we recorded it so many times because he wanted to. It was too slow, or it was too fast, or like I say, it was more the overall. Once we got to the point where he was happy for me to do a final vocal, I feel like once he was sort of on board with the song, he kind of trusted in our musicianship and my vocals to kind of obviously decide which is the best take, but generally just say, well, I like where the melody's going, so just make sure you do it well.
Now, you've never been able to predict what happened with Phil Spector after you finished the recording. But looking back, you mentioned, one of the reasons you stopped it for your own mental health and that kind of thing. Looking back, were there any behaviours you saw at the time that you might have thought were just eccentricities, which on reflection were like massive red flags in any way?
I'm not sure, because a lot of the time that he worked with us, he was quite heavily medicated, so we didn't see the famously aggressive Phil Spector that has kind of gone down in history, because he would sort of zone in and out of not consciousness but lucidity. So yeah, it was, and also he had a security guard with him. One on the first sessions we did with him, he had this security guard called Jay, who was like ex NYPD, and really looked after him, made sure he took his meds, and kind of kept him on the straight and narrow. So we didn't see anything, like I say, nothing particularly dark or aggressive, just more eccentric behaviours. But you could tell that this was someone who wasn't mentally well. That was for sure.
When and where were you when you found out the news about Lana Clarkson?
We were mixing the album.
Fuck.
So, yeah, that kind of came completely out of the blue. And just a horrific situation. So that's another thing that's kind of troubling about the sort of pressure on young musicians, where we were asked, obviously asked about that situation, and it's such a deep and dark and heavy subject. Do you see people like pulling up things that I said and I don't even remember saying, and say, oh, how could you say that about that? Or maybe I said something without having any access to exactly what happened, and you'll say like, oh, let's even things like, let's wait and see what I don't know about this, what's happened in the situation. Let's wait and see all the details before taking a judgment. And I've seen people sort of comment, oh, what a horrific thing to say. Everyone knows what happened. And it's like, well, do you know where my head was at, or what I'd seen at that point? People just make that sort of judgment, and obviously as more details emerged, and of how horrific and tragic the thing was, you kind of your opinion on it changes. So you yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's like it's a big shock to be talking 1 minute, kind of talking about, oh, what do you think about Noel Gallagher calling you a cock? To the next minute, sort of BBC News going, what do you think about this woman being murdered by this bloke who's just produced your record? Like, shit, that's a heavy burden to carry, for knowing that there are people who are in his camp and his associates and his like world who were still maintaining his innocence, who would jump on us if we said anything definitive about his guilt, and then people quite rightly on the sort of on the other side who are like, he's an evil man, he should rot in jail. So you sort of, it's a difficult position for a young musician to be in, and it's another one of those things where if that had happened now, I would behave completely differently to it and have more courage in my own convictions rather than being worried about what anyone else thought.
Looking back, do you think there was anyone there to kind of guide you or support you in that moment? And moving forward, whatever it's been, 20 years or so, do you think there is more support there for musicians with that type of thing now?
I wouldn't want to criticize anyone too much, because I think it was such a unique situation to be in that I don't think any amount of mental health training or media training could prepare any sort of management or label to advise an artist on what to do in that situation.
Yeah.
But I think it's also a situation where you almost can't say the right thing. Whatever you say is going to upset someone. And whereas normally the most kind of even-handed or what's the word? Sensitive answer or that you can give to a question is usually the best way. In that situation, that's going to upset people as well. So you can't win, really. I think you've just got to, again, just be as honest as you can. And I think, I guess as well, like, the world would be a better place if, instead of kind of jumping off the deep end and going, it's the same for anything. It's like anything that you might have said in the past. Oh, I found this quote from you from 2006 where you said that everyone who eats cheese is an arsehole. You're like, do you still believe that? You're like, well, that was 2006 me, and now I'm fully on board with the cheese eaters.
That's my next question, Fox. Listen, thank you for delving into that. It's so interesting. I mean, wow.
I feel like if everyone had a lot of the things that they said, obviously it's a million times worse if you're someone like Robbie Williams or even Chris Martin and people like that. It's a million times worse because they're so much more in the limelight. But even as far as us, it's like a lot of things that we said and thought when we were in our early 20s ended up being written down. And it's like, if everything that anyone had said or thought in their early 20s was occasionally kind of dragged up again, there'd probably be certain things where you think, it's not even that I necessarily was a completely different person. It's just, you just learn to phrase things differently, and my sort of morals and my political values and things have remained largely the same. But I'm just more mature in the way that I would express things. So it's I think that's where bands like Oasis kind of flourish, where they genuinely don't give a fuck what they say now, what they said in the past, and they're just kind of, are just too sensitive to not to worry that someone's out there looking at something that I've said in, like you say, about that sort of very dark and serious situation, and under the pressure of a kind of interview or whatever, and gone, oh, that's what you think about that. What you said about that when you were 23 is definitely what you think about it now that you're 44. It's just a weird way to look at the world.
Listen, thanks for sharing that. That's it's a fascinating insight into what was a difficult time in your career. So thank you for sharing that.
It's all right.
Only very occasionally, for very special guests, do we break the mold of not having kind of a stage left musician, so like a session musician or band member who's not the front person. But often we speak to those people about how they best prepare for either auditions or just to get on board with front people and the talent. And you're a very shy person, I know, but like, you are regarded as that by a lot of people, right? So this is going to be such an interesting perspective. When you've in the past looked for either session musicians for your solo records, such as the one at Rack, for instance, I was there when you recorded it, or when you've played in bands, from your perspective as the talent, as kind of the main songwriter, what are the top 3 or 4 qualities you're specifically looking for in individuals so that they'll work with you to go on tour with, whatever it might be in the studio? What are the top 3 or 4 qualities you're really looking for that might just be beyond technically being able to play their instrument?
I think I watched or listened to the stuff, and I sort of follow him on Instagram as well, the bassist from Gorillaz. Yeah. I don't want to bastardize his name. Shay, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Shay.
Yeah. But yeah, he put it right, really, where it's like being a great musician is obviously hugely important, but I think almost even more important is how you are as a character, and how amenable you are to changes or working under pressure, or just sort of being a nice person to be around on tour, I think is just as important. So yeah, we've Stel, the bass player in the band, kind of plays with Spiritualized, so quite frequently we'll have to get someone into depth for him when he's managed to double book a gig or something. Or just sort of navigating that. So yeah, I think for us it's usually quite a last minute or a situation where a musician won't have that time to prepare with the band, so it's just about doing the preparation at home, asking. Don't be afraid to ask questions, I think, is a good thing. Don't assume that if you ask questions, people will think, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Or the more questions you ask to put yourself at ease, I think is a really important thing. And yeah, just I think also the sort of style of a band is important as well. Like, if you're depping for a band, watch. You don't want to turn up looking exactly like the band. But at the same time, if you're depping for a band like us, or a band who's sort of, for want of a better term, indie, you don't want to turn up with a flying V bass, or or start slapping or doing anything like that.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
That's the next tour. But what's the process? So you just mentioned, like, if there's a clash, right? And you with Spiritualized, like, what is the process for you? Is it like literally going on your phone and going, who are the bass players I know? Or like, what is the actual process from your perspective to find that person you might replace in that situation? Like, have you got a subs bench?
Well, it's, yeah, so one person who's done quite, which is, I guess, quite unusual and people maybe aren't aware of, is Andy from Travis. Apart from being an amazing guitarist, he also plays bass. So I think out of everyone, he's the person who's depth for Stell the most, and we've done whole tours. We did the Love Is Here tour with Andy playing bass, which was amazing. So obviously that's a slightly different situation than someone coming in completely cold who we don't know. We've been friends for a long time, and I guess the first time we got him in on bass, there was that slight nervousness of like, hang on, aren't you a guitarist? But he did such a good job, and I feel like one area where we've been really lucky, because most of the bass players that we've had, or I say most, all of the bass players that we've had, have been really tasteful and have just turned up and done the job, and haven't tried to overdo it. But I guess that's even more so with Andy, because he isn't primarily a bass player. He just meticulously learned the parts and turned up and played them, whereas you can imagine that there's probably a lot of bass players out there who are like, well, I want to be better than the person that I'm stepping in for. I want to prove myself as a bass player. It's like, it's not necessarily I guess it depends what band you're playing in. Maybe if you're playing in a jazz trio or something, that can work. But if you're just coming in to do a job, then it's just about learning the parts as meticulously and as accurately as you can. And I think the best bass players can still let their personality and their style of playing and the feel that they have shine through, even within those constraints, which is an unusual sort of alchemy. Like, how does this sound different even though it's exactly the same? And it's the same like when I work with musicians on my solo stuff as well. Like, he happens to be called Ben as well, but there's a drummer called Ben Kennedy, who worked a lot with Foxes and does a lot of session stuff. I really enjoy playing with him, just simply because I love Ben Byrne, the drummer in Starsailor. But he has a very distinct style that works for the band, and I feel very comfortable with. So it's nice to kind of work with a different sort of player, a different sort of drummer who comes in and plays with more of a sort of loose. Loose is doing it in the best possible way, I mean. But to have someone like that to come in and play slightly differently, and it kind of draws a line between the Starsailor stuff and the solo stuff, because the drumming and the rhythm is so fundamental to the music that if you've got someone bring in something different, then it does kind of create a distinction between the two things.
This is a delicate question, but I think it's such an important question. I have to ask it, given that I've, I feel like in some ways I do 9 years of, interviewing session musicians, etc. Like, I think it'd be wrong of me not to ask this, but how would you advise session musicians to negotiate a day rate or a fee, or financially, with a talent such as yourself, if they feel that A, they're not being paid enough, or it's unfair, and B, there's lots of scenarios where the talent or the singer actually has no idea what that person's been paid, is assuming they're being paid a lot more, and lets like the management deal with it, and there's just this like complete disconnect between what the person is earning and what the singer is. Now, I know that's like a really personal question, but it's definitely an issue in the music industry that I think doing this podcast for many years I've unearthed, and I'm not the only person to unearth it, of course. But what's your thoughts about, like, if that was the case, how would you best advise a musician to have that conversation with the singer?
That's a good question. I guess just know what you're worth and be upfront about it. I think the worst thing you can do is kind of keep conversations kind of too bright and breezy and sort of almost avoid the subject of how much you want to be paid until the last minute. I think it should almost be the first thing. It's like, or not the first thing. It's like doing this stuff with Izzy on cello. We had the discussions about, these are the songs. Do you like them? Are you available on these dates? Or can you do it remotely? What's your rate? it's as simple as that, really. And I think
So it's down to you to ask what the rate is, would you say, in that situation?
Yeah, I think as a musician, yeah, I think as an artist who wants musicians, it's down to you to ask the musician what they want to be paid, basically. So
I'm not sure that's always the case. So that's like, I'm glad you're doing that. No, I'm really glad you're doing that. Listen, I'm really conscious of time, so
but you can. I guess there are situations where you might be constrained with a budget, so you might say, the rate is X. Do you want to do it for that? And then, I guess if you feel that that's undervaluing what you're worth, then you've got to have the strength to kind of walk away, to say, no, that's not enough for me. But I think it's difficult when there's newer artists kind of coming up who are very constrained with their budget. So there is that sort of maybe a session musician is more kind of wrestling with, well, this could be my first job. Maybe someone's going on tour in America or some opportunity like that, and it's like, I'm going to earn peanuts, but is it going to be a stepping stone to something bigger? Or I can understand how that can then be a more difficult decision to sort of navigate. I think maybe, isn't there like a musician's? I feel like string players and orchestras and things are a lot more unionized and a lot more strict on these things. But I'm sure there's like a standard musicians union rate that you're not really supposed to deviate from. And it's like, there should be a musician's minimum wage as well. It's like, if you if you're sort of losing out, or I'm trying to think, if you can't afford to pay for your basic amenities on the wages that you're earning, because you're doing a job at the end of the day, then there's something wrong.
I guess the challenge is when that band say progress and there's a lot more money available, and that day rate just stays the same. Right? Yeah. That's I think where there can be some challenges, which is interesting.
I think that sometimes it can work the other way as well, where we've done tours where we've paid everyone a decent rate and we've come out with less than anyone else on the tour.
Wow.
And this is like quite big tours as well. There's literally like everyone else has come out with more than we have, which is obviously slightly painful at the time. But then you think that we earn from publishing, and we earn, like you say, there are tours and there are gigs where we do a lot better, and you hope that these things kind of balance out over time, where, like you say, there's gigs where we do really well and the crew still gets the same rate, and there are gigs where, or tours where the budget's tight and the crew ends up getting more than us. So it's just about finding that happy medium where it's like, if you're doing the same job, I guess it becomes more of an issue if you're like Taylor Swift, or you're playing sort of Wembley Stadium. But I think if you're doing the same job in a 200 cap venue as you are in a 1,000 cap venue, then or you feel you are, then what am I trying to say? Like you say, it is a sensitive subject. Yeah, I think to answer your question about like seeing a band progress or go from playing a 200 capacity venue to them playing like an arena or something, I would say if you want your pay to be weighted, would you be prepared to take your wage back down then, if it was or I think most people are happier to say like, that's my rate, that's what I do, I won't work for any less, whether you're playing in a toilet or you're playing an arena. It's like, I guess as long as people are happy with that, then yeah, I think sort of more like I say, more pay that's sort of weighted on the size of the venue would need to work both ways.
Yeah. Really, really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up by asking about a couple of songs that you wrote that are just some of my favourite songs. The Greatest Story Never Told. Mate, what a beautiful song. You must be proud of that one.
Yeah.
So that's a solo song of James's, and everyone listening to this, write on your phone right now to listen to it immediately after this interview finishes, because it's just it's one of the best songs you've never heard. Ironically, given that's the title if you haven't heard it. Tell us about writing that song. What's your memories of writing that song?
I remember I was sat in a tiny flat in Islington, because we kept having to move about during lockdown, which is the worst possible time to have to move around. And just listening to a lot of sort of Bon Iver and Ben Howard and all those kind of ethereal songs and types of music. And I remember my grandma had died about a year before, or a couple of years before, I think, when I sat down to write it. I thought I've never really touched on that subject or that happening, because it's something that happens to everyone. It's like, especially as you get older, like most people's grandparents have passed. So, and it's something that I think you can look on with a lot more sentimentality and sweetness than some of the more, obviously when anyone younger dies, it's a lot harder to process. And so I think it was sort of tapping into that feeling of like not having that person around, but feeling sort of pleased in a way that they got to live such a full life. And I think that the greatest story never told is about people like her who were just unequivocally and what's the word, just massively uncritically supportive of everything that I did. And she just didn't, well, it's like most of the people, I've been really lucky that I've got a great family and are always really encouraging. But I think what was unique about my grandma and people like that is it's anything that happens is she would treat it the same. There's no context to anything or idea that this achievement or that achievement is bigger than the other. It's just like, oh, that's you got a top 40, that's incredible. Or you got a top 10, that's incredible. Oh, you played. I played Scunthorpe last. We'd never played Scunthorpe, but just. Or I played Hull last night. Grandma's. Oh, that's brilliant. What's Hull like? Because just everything was just relentlessly positive. And I think that was in my mind when I thought about the greatest story never told. Is literally like if you don't listen to those voices who tell you to go for it, then your story does remain untold.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I started learning guitar around the times that you folks started like being on the scene and being on Top of the Pops and stuff like that. And I always remember learning Fever on guitar. And at the time, because I've not been playing very long, I remember thinking it was outrageous that a song began with B minor, because it was the first song that I ever learned that began in B minor, which is just quite a funny thing. Like that's a song that means a lot to a lot of people. What's your how do you reflect on that song now? What does that mean? What does that song mean to you today when you look back on that song?
It still means a lot. It's one of the songs that's really resonated, and I feel like it's kind of had a bit of a resurgence in my mind as like in terms of just fitting with what's going on today, because I hear echoes of Hosier and Rag and Bone Man in the sort of bluesiness of it, whereas some of the other songs are more distinctly, obviously that's got our stamp on it, but some of the other songs are more distinctly Starsailor. I can imagine Hosier singing Fever. So yeah, it is one of the songs that's kind of I still feel something when I play it, and I still relate to it. Whereas maybe some of the other songs although I enjoy performing them, it's more of a performance and more for the kind of benefit of the crowd, really. And I maybe don't as it's helped that I changed the key of it as well. I play in A minor now.
Oh, here we go.
I play it in B minor when we do it with the band, but when I go out solo, I play it in A minor because it sort of sounds a bit deeper and weightier than in the old key because my voice has gone down a few notches.
Oh, mate, it has not gone. That is a lie. That is ridiculous. I've got videos from my phone when you played Brighton, whenever it was, 18 months ago, and your voice was ridiculous. It was absolutely amazing. So, yeah, no, you're being too modest there. Listen, I just want to thank you for being such a great guest on the StageLeft Podcast. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. What's next for you? So you're playing some festivals over the summer, is that right?
Yeah, we've got quite a few festivals over the summer. I guess Victorious that I'm doing solo again is probably the best known that we're doing. So yeah, hopefully next year will be a big year for us as well because it's the 25th anniversary of the band.
Oh, nice.
So I was gonna try and work out how to mark that in the best possible way. Yeah, playing Liverpool Philharmonic. They've got a little sort of small music room venue, still a beautiful little theatre. Doing that as a solo gig as well that I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, just and the thing with the solo thing as well is that where the Starsailor gigs, I almost forgot we've got dates in November as well in the UK, Italy, and Greece.
Amazing.
With the band. And yeah, the thing with the solo thing is the band dates are generally booked quite far in advance, so we've got a good idea of what we're doing. Whereas sometimes solo gigs can come in a month or a couple of months before, so there could be gigs I'm doing later in the year that I'm not even aware of at this point, chatting to you now. So that's another sort of aspect of the two worlds that I inhabit that I really enjoy.
Well, listen, I encourage everybody to check out, stuff that you've been releasing this year. Check out, I'll pull out some songs for a few people. So The Greatest Stories Never Told, a song called Neon Sky, which is a Starsailor song, which is a bit of a deeper cut, and You Never Get What You Deserve, which is going to be played on the outro as we finish up now. The outro to that song is just absolutely epic. It's one of my favourite outros to a song I've ever heard. So listen, thanks for all your wisdom, your insight, everything that you shared. Listen, good luck with the gigs later on in the year. Keep dropping songs of the solo stuff that we'll be checking out. And thanks for being such a great guest on the StageLeft Podcast.
No problem.